This just in, you are looking at obviously a very disturbing live shot there. That is the World Trade Center, and we have unconfirmed reports this morning that a plane has crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center.
Unlike the many people who were actually there to witness firsthand the tragedy of September 11th, 2001, my story is not one of survival or a first-hand account, but it does come from a unique position of where I was at that specific time period in my life. I just finished college in 1997 and lucked out and got my first position at a local news station out of Charlotte, North Carolina, working as a video editor for various newscasts.
Covering the Carolinas. This is Channel 9 Eyewitness News, 6 o'clock.
And it was a really great job, you know, complete rookie in the business, but it was a definitely good place to get my start, and was completely surrounded in an entirely new way of working and learning, and just every day was a learning experience, working around, you know, some pretty well-known faces in the Charlotte market, and all of a sudden I was right there working right in the midst of them.
We give you more local news coverage with stories easy to understand.
In 2001, I was actually working on the 5:30 and 6 p.m. newscast. I was actually the 5:30 p.m. chief editor of that newscast, editing the entire show. And then when those shows would finish, I would begin working on the 10 and 11 o'clock newscast. So it was always, you know, a lot of work, a lot of editing, a lot of fast-paced editing, and it was just a really good time. I was young, rambunctious, and just happy to have my first job, you know, isolated in the TV business.
Something devastating has happened, and again, unconfirmed report that a plane has crashed into one of the towers there. We are efforting more information on this subject as it becomes available to you.
The morning of 9/11 was a pretty strange morning, I recall. At that time, I'd lived in an apartment and I had a roommate. And I remember that morning my roommate waking me up saying the World Trade Centers were just, one of the World Trade Centers was just hit by an airplane, a small airplane. And this came off of his clock radio, because at that time we had a TV in the living room, but we didn't have cable TV. And on top of that, our TV didn't work. So he had heard this on his clock radio, and of course we figured that out, and we're talking about that, and we walked into the living room, and there sat our TV that, you know, hadn't worked. We haven't had cable in months. Probably didn't really have enough money to afford the cable bill at that point in my life. But I remember I just decided I was just going to turn the TV that hadn't worked in who knows how long, and the TV actually turned on. And I found this very strange, because it was a TV that hadn't worked for who knows how long it had been, but for some reason on this day it decided it wanted to turn on. Although we didn't have cable, that was at a point in time where you still had an antenna and you could tune in channels. Lo and behold, we were able to tune in and wind in a newscast, and there was 9/11 taking place right there on the TV that hadn't worked for so long.
Jean, can you tell us, I don't know if you can tell which tower it is?
The northern tower versus the southern tower, and it seems to be on all sides of the building.
And I remember watching it, and just like anybody who was watching it, I was pretty mesmerized by what I was seeing. And you know, at first, like everyone else, you didn't know exactly what was happening.
Do you have any idea what hit the World Trade Center? We're getting reports that an airplane hit the building.
I hear a plane, then all of a sudden I saw it go right into the World Trade Center.
You didn't know, you know, maybe someone just lost control of an aircraft and couldn't control it and ran into the side of the World Trade Center. So at that point, you know, me and my roommate didn't really know, like the rest of the world, what was going on. I remember looking at the side of the World Trade Center and just seeing the gaping hole in the side of it where the aircraft entered, and just, you know, like anyone else who looks at that for a certain period of time, it's just hard to take in, and you see the smoke funneling out, and you're just wondering, you know, what's happening inside, and you can only imagine that it probably isn't a good situation. But at that point, the second plane hadn't hit the other tower.
We have another copy. There is the second plane, another passenger plane hitting the World Trade Center. These pictures are frightening indeed. These are just minutes between each other.
When the second plane did hit, it didn't take long to realize that this was more than just an accident, and that it more than likely was a terrorist attack. From working in TV news, I was familiar with the terrorist attacks that Osama bin Laden did on Tanzania and Kenya, as well as the USS Cole, which had happened before 9/11. So, you know, initially I believe that was everybody's first idea of who was behind the attack. So when the second plane hit, it was pretty much a dead giveaway that the United States of America was under attack, and would have been a good chance that he had something to do with this.
The Associated Press is reporting right now that the FBI in Washington is investigating reports that these two plane crashes are the result of foul play. There is a report here by the Associated Press of a possible plane hijacking.
And so we, you know, continue to watch the coverage of 9/11, and you're just sitting there, and you know that the world has changed immediately, because this is huge. It's something like that hasn't been done of this magnitude probably since Pearl Harbor. But I was completely just blown away by what was happening, and just continued to watch and just see how everything was going down. And then, you know, eventually live on television we watched the first tower collapse, and then later on the second one came down as well. One minute they're there, and the next minute they're gone, and your mind's just trying to figure out what just happened. And then, you know, when the smoke clears, the buildings are non-existent. They're not there. So it was a pretty emotional time for me to be at home and watch this. And I knew later that day that I actually had to go in and work my shift at the news station, and I knew that's when things were going to get pretty real. And of course, in the midst of all this, the Pentagon and Flight 93 had went down as well. So all this had started trickling in, all the news of this, and it really just began to impact, you know, everything that I knew what was about to happen when I showed up at work. All the news and the footage that I knew I would have access to and I would be seeing firsthand as soon as I showed up at work. I remember showing up at work that day and coming in the back entrance to the newsroom, and a lot of commotion in the newsroom, like anytime there's breaking news or a big story. I remember as soon as I walked through the newsroom door, I was thrust right into the story of 9/11, it felt like. As a video editor for a newscast back in that day, early 2000s, we would take these large beta SP tapes and record on the different feeds from the different news networks, ABC, CNN. Throughout the night, you know, you're loading tapes and gathering tapes, so you would have the actual footage to edit for the newscast. The producers would write stories, and the editor's job was to go in, grab that time frame that the story would have been on, and find the footage and edit what the producer wrote. It was almost like when these feeds were coming in and I would watch them or be, you know, rummaging through the footage, it was almost like actually being there. If it if it wasn't actually a live feed from a New York camera, from a certain network, it was a recently recorded, long-winded take of just sheer raw footage from the aftermath, as well as the actual tragedy of 9/11. But it put me right there in the center of everything that had happened just by looking at the footage and looking at these tapes. At this point, the world has seen this footage, but I remember the ground being completely covered in ash and dust and dirt and papers, and just people covered with dust and whatnot, and everybody's just kind of strolling around, just trying to take everything in that just happened and trying to make sense of things. And even though there was a lot of panic, I remember seeing just a lot of helplessness too, looking at people's faces as they would walk by in those video clips. But seeing that, on the actual day of 9/11 and the weeks following, just day in and day out, really started taking, its toll on me, as far as making that day a little more sensitive for me, I guess you could say, because not everyone had access to the type of footage that I was seeing, aside from, the things that you would see on a live newscast coverage. I had extra footage that I was going through, and so I really got to see a whole nother world of what happened on 9/11 that most people probably didn't get to see. They would only get to see the parts that we would edit for the newscast, or what would run during a newscast. As an editor at a news channel, we got to see quite a lot more. As an editor who had been there for a few years, I was actually part of the promotional side of things too, and I worked in a specific edit room that was called Edit Bay number 12. But I remember I got to edit the cold open intro for what was either the 5 p.m. or the 6 p.m. newscast with Bill Walker and Suzanne Stevens. Never will forget editing that piece for that intro to the newscast. Probably the biggest cold open intro I had done in my entire time at the news station. It definitely was a bittersweet, but a very, memorable, important piece that I got to add to my resume at that point in my young career. So at that point as well in my life, I was actually in a band, and it was a band called the Stiltskins, and we had a song called The Higher I Go, and it had nothing to do with 9/11, of course, but there were some lyrics in it that I felt like kind of coincided with kind of some of the imagery that I had been watching for weeks. And I eventually ended up taking that song and making a music video to it, which was completely covered with the footage of 9/11. And I've actually still got the tape that I recorded that on. And here's that music video right here. And like I said, I got to get it converted, but this was that actual tape from the Stiltskins. But you can see right here, it even says 9/1. So it was in September of that month that this tape was labeled up. And we would use these tapes in edit bays and put all kind of stuff on it, re-rack them and record over things. But this one, I edited that music video and I kept this for safekeeping. In 2010, my girlfriend at the time, and which would later be my wife, we went to New York City to do a somewhat vacation, but I knew going that I wanted to check out Ground Zero and see what kind of shape it was in. And this would have been 9 years after 9/11 in 2010, and they were still in the Ground Zero area, clearing things out, and I guess preparing for the what would soon be the memorial grounds for 9/11 of the two towers. But it was really interesting being there and walking across the tunnel bridge they had set up right there in front of it, and we got to grab some photos of the area. And of course there were still cranes and American flags hanging off of them, and there was actually still windows of the surrounding buildings from the area there that were still broken, and I remember seeing that. And just, you know, being there after that and after seeing all the footage, it just held like a place in my heart that I knew I had to be there. I knew I wanted to be there. But to our surprise, there was some remnants and traces of the tragedy that we could see all the way, you know, fast forward 9 years later in 2010. Years after visiting New York City, we went to Washington, D.C., and we went to the American History Museum. And I didn't realize at that point that there was an actual exhibit that held the actual camera that was used to record the first impact of the World Trade Center. They were actually filming a firefighter documentary, and the camera operator who was there filming swung the camera around and captured the first impact with that camera that's on display there. And it just so happened that it was a camera that I actually have worked with many times early on in my career, and I own the exact camera that's on display. But I actually still have the camera, and it's this camera right here. This same camera was the one that was used to record that first impact, the only known shot of the first impact. So for that reason, I've held on to this, and will probably keep this for the remainder of my life as a reminder of that. As a video editor, I do a lot of time working at a desk, you know, sitting in front of a computer screen. So every 9/11 memorial service that has happened for probably the past 15 years, I believe early on I wasn't watching them because the internet wasn't as vibrant as it is nowadays. But I think every memorial service for the past 15 years, I've sat in front of a computer screen and watched it. Either had it in the background while I was working on a project, waiting for the moments of, you know, if it was the planes hitting or if the towers collapsed. Always taking a moment or two while they ring the bell to just be silent and think about the people who lost their lives. So it's something that I'll continue to do, and it's something hopefully I never have to miss, because I think everybody who lost their lives on that day gave each of us a gift and a reminder that no time is guaranteed, time is precious, and we never know when we're working towards the last moments of our life. And to appreciate that and to cherish every day and every moment, no matter what the situation is, no matter how hard and difficult life can and will get. The tragedy of 9/11 definitely left a footprint on the hearts and minds of the majority of human beings in the world in regards to just thinking of that, appreciating things, and just remembering that we never know when that time will be, and we shouldn't live in fear, but it's just a reminder that we need to cherish every day and every moment. I think just watching, you know, so many documentaries through the years too has really allowed me to form somewhat of a connection to some of the voices behind the tragedies of 9/11. And these aren't people that I knew, or I don't know their family members, but just from consecutive years watching the documentaries, hearing their stories, hearing their voices from inside the towers or their phone calls from on the hijacked planes, it becomes somewhat of a familiar voice and a familiar name, and I somewhat, in some strange way, feel a connection to those people. And when I watch these documentaries, it hits home, and really can start to impact me, and it always is going to affect me, and there's always going to be a connection with me and the voices of 9/11. If it's someone who lost her life, or if it's someone who survived and has a story of survival that they've told, you begin to feel like you know these people. One day I do hope to be able to go see the 9/11 memorial. I haven't been able to see that yet, but I do want to go and pay my respects and spend some time right there in the memorial garden area. And there is a couple names on the memorial fountain that I would like to see, and this is based on the documentaries that I've seen. And that's one of them that comes to mind is, and it's just every time I hear his story or hear his voice, it definitely impacts. But it's Kevin Cosgrove, and everybody's heard his voice from inside the towers, the phone call that he made in his struggle. But it's not that there's a bond or a connection, literally between us, but just from the years of hearing his voice and hearing the last moments of his life, his voice will always be the reminder that no matter what's going on, you got to keep going, you got to keep trying, you got to keep fighting, even if it means even if it means pushing back a little bit. And he was frustrated on his call, but his voice shined through, and it was his last hope of getting help up there to him, which they were trying to get up there to him. It just every year that I hear his voice, it just reminds me of I want to be at the memorial site one day, and I want to find his name and maybe trace out his name on a piece of paper. And there's other names too that through the years I've heard, and lots of people are familiar with who they are, that I would like to try to find. I don't personally know anyone who was in the buildings, but these people have become somewhat like family in regards to they've been a part of my life, hearing their stories or hearing their final moments. So hope to do that one day soon. Not a first-hand account, so to speak. Wasn't there, didn't know anyone inside the towers, the Pentagon on Flight 93. Wasn't affiliated with any families, but I did have a side of a story that I felt like deserved to be told after 2 decades. And that's why I wanted to, kind of let the world know. And hopefully this documentary can stand alongside some of the other pieces of work out there that detail stories about this major day in American history. And hopefully it serves as a memorial to those who lost their lives, to those who survived and keep going to this very day.